Well, thank you for attending. My name is Orlando Diaz. I'm your 2024-25 FAMP president. Today we have our update from the Hill webinar with our lobbyist, Sean Stafford, our senior vice president from McGuire Woods. We have made great strides in our lobbying efforts in the last 3 years with Sean, and thanks to our immediate past president, Nathaniel Bittman, for initiating those efforts during his presidency. And we're seeing the rewards of his efforts today. So I will turn it over to Nathaniel and our Government Affairs Chair, Rick Fabrizio.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everybody. We appreciate you attending as we sort of advance kind of forward. We are having still an interesting year as it relates to insurance and condo reform, affordable housing, and so many other crucial topics. And we're very fortunate as an association. And for many of you that are members, as you know, we have a wonderful lobbyist, Sean Stafford with McGuire Woods, who's done a remarkable job, presenting and representing us here at the Florida Association to the Hill. We have a tremendous opportunity always to talk in front of several different lawmakers and legislators about important topics related to housing in our industry, and excited to have Sean this morning. So also want to say thank you to this year's Government Affairs Chair, Mr. Rick Fabrizio. Thank you so much for the work that you've done. We're going to start this morning by opening up. And Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get right into it. Question number one for you. Tell us a little bit about condo reform. We're seeing a lot happening out there, and still we're seeing a lot of seniors that are being displaced, and some concerns as it relates to dues and so on and so forth. So maybe you can share some insight on what's happening on the Hill with condo reform.
Sure. Thanks, Nathaniel, and thank you, everyone. I'll just go right into it. As far as condo reform goes, I mean, everybody has seen the news stories that have been circulating over the last 6 months. The legislature back 2 years ago passed a building safety legislation after Surfside that really took the pendulum and swung it pretty hard over on the safety side, requiring lots of inspections from engineers, requiring reserves that had not previously been satisfactorily banked by the condo associations to all be sort of caught up under a time frame, and that is causing a significant amount of assessments. You see it in not just Miami-Dade. I know the articles have been about Miami-Dade, but really all along the coast. Any building that's more than 30 years old is having trouble with these assessments. And about a month ago, the governor sent a signal to the legislature. He made a comment and said, look, I would be open to the legislature meeting on this and coming up with a way to resolve it. I didn't realize how many impacts there. Governor essentially said, look, this thing was pitched to me a little differently. And I didn't, I am willing to make changes that will help seniors stay in their homes. That kicked off a big discussion between the House and Senate. About a week later, the Senate president came out with a memorandum and said, look, we're not doing a special session. We're going to wait until regular session. We're going to get all the parties together. But, we strongly believe that the building safety standards need to be in place. We believe this is long overdue. We believe condo associations have been essentially negligent for decades. And she sort of left it like that. So that's sort of where they are. This was a House originated bill a few years ago. It was actually sponsored in the House by the incoming speaker, who will be the incoming speaker, Danny Perez, who will become speaker in November after the election. So they're familiar with this issue. I don't know what they're going to do. I wish I did know. I think there will be some discussion around lengthening the timeline it's going to take for these reserves to be caught up, because what seems to be tripping up a lot of these associations is just the sheer amount of money they've got to put into the coffers in a relatively short period of time, causing six-figure assessments in some communities. And obviously, if you're on a fixed income and you move down from New York and you have a pension, this is not, it's having a $150,000 assessment is not anything you plan for. So they're going to start tackling this during regular session. I believe as soon as the elections are over in November, after organizational session, I believe they will start to hold sort of informal discussions with people to see what stakeholders are saying out there, what solutions might be palatable, and sort of where it goes from there. it's unfortunately happening, and I know you didn't ask me this question, Nathaniel, but it's also happening at a time where everyone knows how expensive property insurance is. So it's sort of a double, almost maybe in some places a triple whammy if you don't have a homestead on a condo. It's at least a double whammy, and it's making Florida, less affordable. So I think the legislature is hearing a lot from their constituents about this. This is a big issue in a lot of districts. We saw it brought up when we hosted the incoming Senate Appropriations Chairman Ed Hooper down in St. Pete about a month ago. He addressed this issue and said he would certainly be interested in finding solutions that don't displace a lot of their seniors in these districts. So the legislature is definitely on. They're hearing about this. There is no one solution. There's a lot of disagreement about whether or not the building safety standards need to even be altered or amended, or whether it's the timeline of compliance that they need to look at. So I'd say stay tuned on that. We're going to be keeping our ear to the ground. We'll be participating in these discussions on behalf of the industry to sort of be a part of the give and take, Nathaniel.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll move to, and I do want to let the audience know that's present. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. That'd be very helpful. We'll address all questions at the very end. Thank you. Let's move to Government Affairs Chair Rick. Next question.
John, you mentioned insurance, and we just saw the Big Bend get hit with a major hurricane. Insurance costs, increased deductibles, limited providers continue to be a problem in Florida. How do you see the legislature addressing this in this session coming up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think right now, I think you and I were talking yesterday. I believe as of today, the new data that's come out as of today, we think around 50,000 claims have been reported to the OIR, and the estimates are around 800 million. That's going to definitely go up, and it's definitely good. And I'm talking about Helene specifically. Sorry. That's going to go up. It's definitely going to be $1 billion storm. But the problem with Helene are not the insurance claims. The problem with Helene is what you saw all the way down the coast are uninsured losses. People that, essentially very few people have flood insurance. And it seems like the losses went the floods went all the way down almost to Fort Myers. So I think the biggest takeaway right now is the uninsured losses are going to be significant, surely in multiple billions of dollars on people having to fix their own homes that had 2 feet or 3 feet of water in them along the coast, and as much as quarter mile inland in some areas, especially along I think the areas in Pinellas County were some of the ones that really had tremendous amounts of flood, far more than they anticipated. So what does FEMA do? What kind of CDBG dollars end up coming down to Florida for folks, who are, middle and upper income, who ordinarily wouldn't qualify for these types of programs? As far as federal dollars go, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how federal dollars would come in and plug that. There is, when you deal with uninsured losses, the state's going to probably look at a number of different factors. I don't see them creating a giant state fund to help people offset these costs at this point. And I do think they all see it as a problem. They're going to wait and see what kind of federal dollars end up flowing down and how the recovery efforts go. But property insurance wise, as far as this being a wind event, this is a relatively, it was a strong storm, but because it didn't hit Tallahassee directly and it hit a less populated area, you're going to have far less windstorm loss in the state of Florida. You might actually have more windstorm loss in some areas in Georgia than you will in some of these Florida counties that were hit. So windstorm wise, it's not going to be a catastrophic storm. Flood wise, it's shaping up to be a pretty significant event. And unfortunately, lots of this is not going to be not going to be insured. So these storms don't help with the rates, but we've always been told that the reason the rates had gotten so out of control wasn't necessarily the storms. It was really the 15 years of the one-way attorney's fee statute driving up free roofs, crazy amounts of water claims, lots of sinkhole claims, and things that made Florida sort of the epicenter for the largest claims per capita and the largest lawsuits per capita. And right now, what you're seeing in the marketplace is some stabilization. Rates are, rates seem to really be going up over the last couple of months, primarily because of claim inflation, the cost to repair a claim having doubled. That's what seems to be the driver in claims going up, which is happening around the country. But there's certainly I think a few carriers have started to file for slight rate decreases. What we heard at the annual conference from the OIR and from Citizens Property was that is a trend they hope will continue, and you'll see some larger bend in the curve downward. But of course, we all have to, wait and see what happens with the market becoming more competitive, and whether or not those rates go down enough to really, move the needle.
Sean, I'd like to, if you don't mind, Rick, I'd like to add a kind of a subsequent question to that. When we met with Senator Hooper and having some discussions with him as an association, what he pointed out is we look at Senate Bill 2B, if I have that correct, since that, and a lot of people on this call may not be familiar, but when there was a special session of the House and Senate, and the Florida Association was kind of front and center on those topics, one of the things they addressed was one-way attorney's fees, as you addressed, like reducing the number of lawsuits that so many of these carriers have to pay out. Would you mind taking a moment and sharing with the group, Senator Hooper, because we hear a lot of talk, and every time we go to Tallahassee, it always seems like 18 months is the number. We'll see insurance rates come down 18 months from now, 18 months from now, and every 6 months, 8 months, it's 18 months. Could you kind of share with us what that drag is? I mean, Helene will have an impact maybe to a certain degree, but why do we keep hearing these 18 months, dragging out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when they passed the bill did not go into effect for a couple months back in 2022. During that intervening time that they passed the bill and the bill actually went into effect, there were, I think, around 100,000 sort of last minute filings to get in under the old law. So that giant bubble of claims is still working its way through the system. And what OIR has explained is that giant bubble of claims, although that bubble of claims is big, and frankly, I think it was probably unanticipated. I think they did not anticipate the ingenuity of some of the plaintiffs' law firms and using AI to come up to essentially aggregate this giant number of lawsuits and file them before the bill became law. The bad news is those claims are still working their way to the system, which is one of the reasons that rates they've trickled down, but not as much as they wanted. But the good news about it is those claims are actually projecting to cost less than they thought they were going to cost a year or so ago. So the claims are actually costing a little bit less, but there's a huge number of them. So that giant bubble of claims, once it works its way completely through the system, should have you should see more rate stabilization, possible rate decreases. But everyone said this, and everyone predicts certain things, and I can't say with certainty where rates are going to be a year from now, based on what the OIR is telling us, and we have to rely sort of on the professionals that they're stabilizing and they're going to lower. They don't know they don't know if it's going to be a single digit reduction, but they are still bullish on the property market improving from where it is today and where it was, say a year or two ago.
Thank you. And there was a question in the chat box, just to kind of recap. Do we believe, kind of in summation, what's the word on the street over there in Tallahassee and in the House with regards to Helene? Is it safe to assume that Helene kind of adds to the fact that we could potentially, I mean, there's not much that the state can do with regards to Helene to kind of soften those rates? Because as you mentioned, the real problem is the state, it's the people that were uninsured. And I don't know that's really going to necessarily, that may impact rates for insurance. But that was one of the questions in the chat box. Will we see rates on insurance going up as a result of Helene?
Yeah, I don't think we know the answer to that. What we're hearing from the folks at OIR is that we dodged a major bullet by a Cat 4 storm not directly hitting the metropolitan area of Tallahassee. And that would have been a much more significant storm. That could have been a $20 to $30 billion windstorm event. What happened was it tracked, 50 miles to the east. And when it did that, it hit a much less populated area. So you're going to have much smaller windstorms. So I think they feel like, everyone's breathing a sigh of relief. If this storm had gone into Tampa Bay, it would be, that's something that fiscally that could put the state in a serious jeopardy. You could potentially have $100 billion storm with windstorm and flood in Tampa Bay. That didn't happen. When that does happen, if that happens, that's a different conversation. But this was a big storm, but terrible for the people that it hit. But from an actuarial standpoint, it hit an area that didn't have the kind of population impact that it would have had if it was 50 more miles to the west. So I don't think they anticipate this being a huge rate impact. I think the bigger issue is going to be, frankly, what I've heard is on the banking side, folks that have these huge uninsured flood losses, that have a mortgage. What does that mean? Is there a lot of turnover in these communities? Do some people walk away? I think there's some speculation that this could have a little bit of an impact on some of the on the mortgage market in that area where you have all these uninsured losses where people don't have flood insurance.
Thank you, Rick. Anything else you have on that topic?
No, I think we covered it quite well. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Next question is kind of a fun topic, maybe a loaded one. Affordable housing. Obviously, not only is this a national federal topic, but it's always been a topic in the House. And whenever we go out there to lobby on behalf of the FAMP, always a lot of discussion. So any thoughts on affordable housing and what this next session might be looking at in that area?
Well, I think the most positive thing we've heard on affordable housing, and specific to what I think FAMP members really care about, is the Hometown Heroes program. And one thing we discussed with the incoming Senator Probst Chair Hooper, and we talked about the Hometown Heroes program a month ago, and he agreed with us and said, look, he's going to push to double Hometown Heroes from 100 million to 200 million. That would be his, the position he stakes out. I think he'll get a lot of takers on that. I think there's a general consensus that program obviously works. It gets dried up in like a month and a half or 2 months. Adding 200 million will probably, take that program out to 5 or 6 months. So, that's probably the most meaningful place where I think we can probably have an impact on affordable housing. They're getting back into the routine of funding the Sadowski Fund for tax credits for affordable housing, and funding other programs dealing with affordable housing. I also think the My Safe Florida Home program this year, when they expanded it to condominiums, sort of ties in with affordable housing. That was a project of CFO Petronas, was to open it up for condominiums as well. The legislature did that. The governor agreed. So they could put more money into that as well for more storm hardening, where you have that sort of one-to-one match for improvements in your home to get lower insurance rate. Kind of ties in with affordable housing / insurance. So I think that's as far as affordable housing goes right now. I mean, you all saw the debate. If you saw the debate last night, affordable housing took up way more time than I thought it would take up of the presidential debate. And so it's not just an issue in Florida where we know there is an issue. It's an issue around the country. And, and there's things that we can do that have an impact. But ultimately, as inflation comes down, housing probably becomes more affordable to build. I thought the biggest takeaway is we can get funded If we can get double the money in Hometown Heroes, that'd be a huge victory.
Thank you, Rick. You have the next question.
Oh, trigger leads, everyone's favorite subject. There's a lot of frustration around trigger leads, both from consumers and originators. Do you foresee any relief on the horizon for either?
Yeah, so trigger leads, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, as soon as a credit union or credit bureau, excuse me, credit bureau pulls your record, they turn around and sell that on the open market to however many direct marketing organizations, and your clients get blown up with phone calls. Legislators and folks in the executive branch that we have talked to about this issue would like to address it. The challenge everyone has is there's a federal preemption. The Fair Credit Reporting Act preempts how the state can deal with how credit bureaus operate and deal with data. So the state can't pass a bill regulating essentially a credit bureau because they are federally regulated under the FCRA. But we're exploring other ways that the state can actually go in and start to tamp these things down. And we've had some discussions with the Florida Bankers Association, who I believe also want to engage in this fight with us, as well as the Credit Union League, who also we believe wants to engage in this fight. We're having these discussions now, and I suspect we might be able to draft something or come up with something that we can give to the legislature and possibly a statewide official who wants to take lead on it and make an impact this legislative session. But understand the best solution would be for the federal for Congress. I can't remember who has the bill. I have my notes. I don't have it in front of me. But there is a federal bill filed to deal with trigger leads. I think the senator from, I believe it's from Connecticut, has it, along with a couple of the members in the House. So they've made a little bit of progress on a federal level, but I'm a little skeptical of the feds passing any bill within the time it's been filed to like 5 years after. Usually takes lots of time in Congress for them to actually pass something. So I think if we could do something, even if it's small and targeted at the state level, that deals with that, I think we should take a shot at it. The good news is the legislators we've talked to are very interested in doing it. The tricky part is having to craft it. So we're working on that, just so you know.
The federal bill you're referring to is, I think it's House Bill 2656. House Bill 2656. So if anybody wanted to have some fun reading on that, you can. Sean, you and I have had some conversations on this, and the approach that the association is taking, and we've done this for a few years now, is I think we're trying to go down the path of privacy, really, is as we're talking to some of the lawmakers and legislators out there. Is that correct? This year, so for all of those of you that are on the call, part of the plan that Rick and our team and the delegates here at the association with Sean and McGuire Woods, our lobbyists, we're looking to do is kind of go down the path of privacy. Would that be correct? Is that still the angle?
That would be correct. That would be correct. I mean, there are laws on the books in Florida, just like there are on the federal side. There are do not calls lists, but there are also exemptions in the do not calls list for prior business relationships. There are lots of exemptions, and many of these people haven't signed up for the do not calls list, so they're not really covered under that list. So there's privacy. There's sort of the possibility that you could take some state action against someone who bought this list and then solicited a client. So we're looking at we're looking at different ways to craft some language on that.
Thank you. Rick, any other questions on this topic?
Nope. That's a tall mountain that we're gonna try to make some impact on.
We sure will. like to remind everybody that's out there, just keep in mind that, here at the FAMP, our Government Affairs Committee, working with McGuire Woods, we do a lot of work in this area. So if anybody has an interest to participate in government affairs, please reach out to your local chapter president. Please reach out to your local director in your area, and certainly tip your hat if you'd like to participate with our group. On to the next question, kind of a fun one, is Amendment 5. So Amendment 5, which is kind of a quick overview on this one. We currently know that there is a homestead exemption reprieve there. And when this homestead exemption was created, I believe it was back in early 2000, there was about a $25,000 exemption for each individual. If it's a party of 2, you get a $50,000 exemption. And back then, if the value of a home was about $200,000, that was about 25% of an exemption, which wasn't bad. But as we know now, property values have drastically increased, and 50,000 for 2 people may not take you a long way. So any thoughts on Amendment 5, and can you share some color on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think amendment, let me back up and say there are 6 amendments this year on the ballot in Florida, just on the state ballot. Now, you may have local referendum. You could be like some areas where you end up having a 2 or 3 page ballot for some of these elections. But there are 6 amendments on the ballot. Amendment number 5, I think, is the most likely to pass, and I think it's very likely to pass. There are other amendments that are being heavily fought over. The legalization of medical marijuana is heavily fought on both sides. And remember, it's important to remember, in Florida, you don't pass an amendment with 51% of the vote. You pass an amendment with 60% of the vote. And I'll tell you, getting to 60% is very, very difficult when you have 2 sides competing on yes and no. It's relatively easy to spend $10 or $15 million against something and get 41% to kill an amendment. So I think what you'll see is on most of the amendments, I think very few of them are going to get 60%. The partisan school board amendment, which is Amendment 1, requiring all school board races to be partisan, I think that loses. That will not get 60. I think the right to hunt and fish will probably hit the 60%. I think the adult recreational marijuana amendment, I can't say for sure, but I would not put I would bet on the governor getting at least 41% against that and keeping it at a medical marijuana structure instead of full recreational. And on the abortion amendment, I've seen conflicting polls on it. I tend to think that the governor probably polls at least 41% against that as well. Homestead will pass. And then there's a repeal of public campaign financing. I haven't seen a whole lot of credible polling one way or the other. I just have a gut that it may not get to 60. So I think you may end up with probably 2 amendments passing this year out of the 6, and that's the Homestead Amendment and the right to hunt and fish, making it a constitutional right. So I know you're recording this. Maybe I'll come back and I'll have to eat my word.
Another update. So just to clarify, when we talk about the homestead exemption, we are referring to Amendment 5.
Right. Right.
Yes, and just so that everybody knows, when you do go to the polls this time around, when everybody went to the polls last time around, this came up, and I don't think people really understood what it meant. So they actually voted in opposition of it, and as a result of that, it didn't pass. So when you go to the polls this time, ladies and gentlemen, please make sure you're mindful of Amendment 5, and certainly a great topic. Please read this bill. For those of you that are looking to do lunch and learns and educational events for your referral partners, or talking to consumers that are buying homes here and are concerned about rising taxes, good intel and good information for you to be aware of Amendment 5, and certainly a valuable topic to speak about. And please remember that we here at the association are working to make sure that we are in support of Amendment 5. So thank you for that information, Sean. Well, now there was a question, another Sean, and we're going to backtrack just for one moment. But Sean Miller, thanks so much. Good to see you on here with Van Dyke Mortgage. He asks, what's the likelihood that we would actually pass anything with trigger leads? And I don't know that passing is the issue. I think that what you're kind of addressing with trigger leads is that we are looking to draft language so that we can present this and actually find a sponsor, and then from there kind of move forward. So could you talk about the process with trigger leads here in the state and what we would do?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the goal would be to pass something and get it signed into law this year. That would be the objective, but it's a long process. Obviously we have to come up with the right language that, doesn't violate federal law. That's number one. Number two, get buy-in from the legislature and other stakeholders on our side, I think we would have other, other associations would all be in favor, and other aligned associations that are in the mortgage side. I think the Bankers Association is ready to do something on this. Certainly, the credit unions are, from what we were told. So I think step two is sort of organizing our alliance, and then we just have to fight it through the process. We're gonna get sponsors on both sides and have them run the bills, and as they run the bills, we'll go through committee, and we'll probably require a little bit of testimony on this on both sides, and that's sort of a good opportunity for, I think, the association to present a good case in front of the legislature on just what consumers have to go through when they go in to your offices to get a mortgage. They get their credit pulled, and all of a sudden, they get 45 phone calls, and probably 10 of them are I don't want to say, well, 10 of them could very well be scam phone calls. So I think that's a good opportunity to present the case and try to push it, over the finish line. I mean, if I assume that Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax will show up and fight it really, really hard. They're big spenders. They also have, they have their sets of lobbyists as well. They do a lot in the States, so it will definitely be a fight. But it's all bringing this, I think, also to the attention of a lot of people and getting some good press on it could actually spur the stuff to happen, I think, at the federal level as well. I think the more you keep the issue out there front and center, the more chances you have of moving the needle in Congress as well. But our goal will be to pass it during the 2025 legislative session.
So we would look to draft this language and then kind of proceed from there. I will remind everybody and let them know we've been working on this for a few years, and we've had conversations with some senior lawmakers over in Tallahassee, and this is not falling on deaf ears. We certainly have had a very captive audience on this topic. So at some point, I do believe we'll make some good progress on it because it just makes sense. I think we're going to defer over to Rick for the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. We're looking forward to having a great year this year, building on the strong foundation that I've been handed, and the wins that we've had over the last 18 months, which are significant with the help of Sean. Supporting the broker community and mortgage professionals is our primary focus, and we have our eye on proposed legislation. Sean, I wanted to open it up for you for questions from the members and let you share with our members insights that you have on the upcoming legislative session.
So we're thinking about an overall plan. What do we see as an association? We've talked about some topics we're going to stay on top of. We'll stay on top of, obviously, Amendment 5. We'll stay on top of affordable housing, condo reform, and insurance. Anything else you see coming up in the legislative session we're going to work on. And as Rick kind of mentioned, also, if you have any additional questions, now's a great time to please put them in the chat.
Well, while they're putting questions in the chat, I'll just mention this very briefly. So the election is obviously in November. This is a presidential election, so there are no statewide officials on the ballot in Florida. Members of Congress are up for re-election. You do have a U.S. Senate race where Rick Scott is running for re-election. I don't think you'll see a whole lot of change in the Florida legislature. There is essentially one competitive seat in the general election, and that's a seat that's in Tallahassee, and it goes out to rural areas of the Panhandle where if you're a Florida State football fan like I am, back in the heyday, Corey Simon was an All-American and a Pro Bowl defensive tackle, is the current incumbent state senator. He's in a re-election battle in Tallahassee against Daryl Parks, who's an attorney, who I actually went to school with at Florida State as well. That's probably the most competitive election out there. And I'd say in the House, there are, between 4 and 5 really tough competitive races where incumbents are having to fend off challenges. Because in 2022, Republicans had such a banner year in Florida, you probably have, you have some folks who, were elected in what are sort of lean Democrat districts that are having to defend those districts now. So, it's possible you could see the Democrats pick up a couple seats in the Florida House, but Republicans will still have strong majorities both in the House and the Senate, and very likely super majorities, in my opinion. Again, we're recording this. I'll have to go back and look and see if my prediction is correct. you do have a few competitive races out there. But I will say this, and I will plug what the PAC committee is trying to do. I think the more involved you all can get, and the more you can donate to the PAC, helps your industry. It helps your industry because it gives us a bigger voice. When we can support folks who are championing this industry and defend them when they're under attack, it only bolsters FAMP in the long run. So if you haven't, this is sort of an out of line plug, Nathaniel or Rick, but if you haven't, sign up for the recurring contribution for the Political Action Committee. It's very influential. It's very important to be able to have the same tools that other associations have in Tallahassee.
On that note, when we meet with legislators, they look at our member rolls and look how many people we actually represent. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, they do. They look and see how many people are out there, how many you have in their area. It's so important for you all to know who your local state rep and senator is in case we get into a really big firefight. So you can make a local call from the district, to your member. That is a very useful tool when we do a call. Those call of actions that we made, have been very helpful. The call of actions previously we did on Hometown Heroes, the call of actions, even the call of actions on the PACE bill this last session. I mean, the governor was ready to veto the PACE bill. Just so you all know, that's all the intel we got. He ended up not vetoing it.
Sean, can you share real quickly the PACE bill so that for people that may not be familiar what that is and how important that was?
Sure. Yeah, the PACE legislation this past year, I thought was moving in a pretty good direction. It was sort of clamping down on PACE lenders a little bit. And then all of a sudden at the last minute, it also put in what we thought was a pretty significant expansion and took out some of the consumer protections. So PACE lenders can actually go in now and do a broader array of lending options, including landscaping, including windows. All sorts of improvements can now be put into a PACE loan. And I know that PACE loan solicitors are not licensed. They're not required to be licensed by the OFR under the statute. They're just sort of half the time there's a 20-year-old kid out with a pad and paper going door to door looking and telling someone they need new they either
Solar.
need a new roof, or they need solar, and they've obviously PACE has had some real problems. Now the good part about the bill was that it gives the local property appraisers the authority to not allow PACE lending in their county. So that was a good piece of the bill that we liked, but it did open it up. We wanted ultimately, I think, to have a veto of the bill. We kept getting word back from staff that they were looking at this bill, they were considering vetoing it. Ultimately, he didn't. But a lot of our the folks who reached out to the governor's office, I heard back from the governor's staff. It made a big difference. So you make a difference when even though we didn't get the veto, hearing that from the governor's staff was, I think, important for us. It makes a difference when you all reach out, you phone call, you email on those call to actions.
Thank you. That is a very good point. And just so everybody knows, with regards to PACE, many of you may be aware of that's solar, that's water system. So the individuals that knock on people's doors and solicit for water softening system, or as Sean is saying, now adding things like landscaping and solar paneling. And many of you know that these individuals are ultimately financing that. And what happens is what we have done here at the FAMP to argue and work around PACE is that many of you that are licensed on this call, we go through specific licensure, we go through a disclosure process to make sure consumers are aware when they're getting into a transaction. Part of what we attempted to kind of regulate over the last few years is looking for specific language in the PACE bill or additional bills that require these individuals when they're going to some sort of financing transaction, that those individuals that are doing the financing should be licensed and go through some type of a disclosure process. Correct, Sean? I think that was pretty much the spirit of what we were attempting to do.
Yeah, I think so. And limiting it. I mean, the good news, I guess, is that in the consumer protection piece, they did at least prohibit these lenders from, taking air conditioners and putting them on a 25-year loan, which was happening in some parts of the state, which is obviously kind of nuts. But there were some good pieces of that bill, but the expansion, I think, was certainly troublesome. from our point of view.
So if you want to know who you're, if you want to kind of attack some of these issues regarding PACE, we know that Mike Twitty is the county appraiser for Pinellas County, and I believe it's Bob Henriquez is also in. If you do a search, you'll see these gentlemen out and about speaking. Certainly, make mention of that, that if you are in opposition of PACE for whatever reason, certainly, read some of these bills and follow us here at the FAMP as we continue to follow some of the regulatory issues regarding PACE. A good opportunity to talk to that county appraiser when you do see them in some sort of a speaking session. So we did put in the chat box a link to donating to PAC. And as Sean mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about how this sort of works with PAC. PAC is a political action committee, and it is donations that we make to certain legislators when they're running. But what's more important about PAC is it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to put out checks to these legislators and lawmakers. What a lot of these lawmakers look at in Tallahassee when we present and go to them and talk to them about some of the items like trigger leads when we're trying to resolve some of those issues, or affordable housing or other topics, they do look to see how much we have in our PAC funds. So in many cases, it's good to actually have a balance in there. So when you can contribute, we do ask that, before maybe you go have that bonefish meal, or maybe that extra glass of wine, or whatever your shtick is, certainly consider making some small donation to PAC. It's very, very helpful, and it does give us a stronger voice when we approach these lawmakers and talk about the bills we're presenting. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. I think we're going to kind of wrap up. Rick, any final? I do see one comment here from Natalie Bunting. That may be something. I think Orlando, there's a comment out here too. I don't know if you want to kind of address that as we're kind of closing out regarding Vicky Lopez, and maybe there's an opportunity, Sean, you can address who is Vicky Lopez and why is she so important to our association?
Sure. Yeah. Vicky Lopez is a freshman member of the House. She was very involved this year in some condo and HOA reform legislation after, all some of the largest frauds and scams that have been pulled off in HOAs around the state over the last few years, usually by self-managed boards, lots of federal indictments and criminal investigations. So she was she's been very involved in the condominium side and the HOA side, and we will be hosting her in Miami on October
15th.
15th, sorry, on October 15th. So if you're in the Miami area, I think it would be a great meeting to come to. We're also, we're supporting Vicky's re-election campaign. We think she's a worthwhile member to support. She is also a priority of the incoming speaker, Danny Perez. For lots of reasons, we're going to financially support Vicky, and we encourage everybody in Miami to link up with with Rick and Orlando and attend.
Thank you. It's perfect. Appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat box. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Rick. We'll turn it back to Orlando for closing.
Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nathaniel and Rick. Thank you to all those who attended. We had a really good showing today. This is what your membership and PAC dollars help us do, put on these events and lobby in Tallahassee. So appreciate you guys. Be on the lookout for more webinars on government affairs and other topics that interest our member base. With that said, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.